In order for a child's self-construction to be fully supported, we have to, really cultivate the culture of work in the classroom community. And we're going to talk exactly about how to do that. But before we do, I want you to step away from the classroom and these children and think about your own learning and your own learning experiences, particularly ones that you found to be effective for you. I'm going to tell a story about one of mine. And this happened my last semester in college. I went to a small liberal arts college that had some core requirements that had to be taken. And one of them was a fine arts class. And I had a fear of artistic endeavors. And so I avoided taking that class until my very last semester. And, looking at the options and the course catalog, I finally settled on ceramics. I thought I could probably manage something with clay. So I went to the first class, and this class was 3 hours long, twice a week. We had to be there 6 hours a week. And at the first class, the professor said he expected we'd be in the studio in our spare time about that much as well, which I thought, that will not happen. And then he also went on to say that this might be the first time in our lives that we really realize that learning does not happen in 45-minute increments like normal class sessions. That in fact, we might go through the whole class, he said, and not have learned anything. He told us that depended on us and on how we worked in the class. I was kind of shocked by this. This is not any sort of experience I'd had before, this idea of, the expectation of my engagement in that way. And he proceeded then to give us a few little mini lessons, on the first day, lessons in how to wedge the air bubbles out of the clay, then a few lessons on hand building techniques. But the bulk of the time we were in class, those 3 hours, we were expected to work independently on whatever we chose. And he would wander around and, offer guidance or answer questions if needed. And he also kept very busy maintaining the kiln or working on new clay or whatever. And so this was really hard for me to begin with. This freedom in the work cycle was overwhelming. And I felt like I was constantly being scrutinized by my professor and others. And so I would try to look busy and half-heartedly, hand build or something. And the class time just went by so slowly. Finally, one day, I decided to try a pot on the wheel. We'd been shown some of the techniques for doing that. So I thought, well, I'll try it. And I felt very nervous because you're very visible in the studio when you're sitting on that wheel. But I started, and the first thing you need to do when you're throwing a pot on the wheel is you need to center the clay so that your piece is centered. And that takes a lot of time. It took me a while to perfect a centering technique. And then I finally reached in to try to pull a pot up. And it was so exciting. And then I ruined it, poked my finger through or something. Suddenly I was hooked. I spent all this time that first time I got on the wheel and didn't actually get a pot off of the wheel at all. But the class period was suddenly over. And I continued through several class periods and finally was able to get a pot off the wheel. And I emerged from class after a few more class periods, doing 4 or 5 pots every class period, and coming in in my spare time to spend more time in the studio. By the end of this class, I had over 50 pots, and you can see my progression. Some have really thick bottoms, and some aren't trimmed very well, and some are decent. And I was so proud of that work and also of how I had learned and taught myself with help from this expert. This was a transformational learning experience for me, to recognize that learning can happen through freedom in an environment that has been prepared for that, with the right sort of guide available to offer just what's needed when it's needed. He left me alone to begin with. I think he could tell that I was so nervous. But once I built some confidence, he would spend more time offering me guidance. This was a powerful learning experience for me, like none I'd ever had before. And it made me so happy when I found Montessori education to know that children could have this kind of freedom in their learning and build up this excitement and capacity for work. So on my first day of school with children, my first day of teaching, I went in super excited to, inspire these children into independent work. And I had carefully planned the day because my trainers had told me they'll need a lot of adult guidance and support in this first day. They don't know what to do. You have to orient them. So I had sort of structured the day really carefully. And the first activity was that they needed to decorate something. So I had allotted 15 minutes for that. And I looked over at my beautiful group of 6 to 9-year-olds and saw them all coloring and decorating their papers. And it was so exciting to see. And about 90 seconds in, one sweet little 6-year-old boy marched over to me with his project and said, "I'm done." And I sort of looked at him blankly, thinking in my head, no, you have 13 and a half more minutes. That's what I've allotted. Like, we're not moving on to anything else. You're supposed to be invested in this work. You're supposed to be inspired and be able to keep yourself busy. And so I, hobbled through that day, managing all these children and their different needs. And I was sort of overwhelmed by the end of the day, thinking, I thought I was going to have this group of children excited to work because that's their characteristics and they just jump in and do it. And I started to feel almost disillusioned. Yeah, I was idealistic. New teachers are, and we need that idealism. But I talked to a seasoned teacher next door who said, Jamie, yeah, they want to work. That's a tendency. They are going to build that capacity, but it has to be cultivated by the adult within the community. Everyone will participate in it, but it won't just spring up spontaneously without support from the adult. So this is what we're going to be talking about. How do we cultivate this culture of work to support children in having that freedom and that independence and that self-discipline?